Hello everyone, I'm Cchavi Vasisht, Faculty of Sociology at NICE IS and an educator at Unacademy. We are here today with this part 2 of Women Economic Participation. We had covered this topic in the previous lecture, and that was last Saturday. And this lecture is in continuation with a similar lecture. And if you haven't heard of that lecture before, I would request you to please go back and listen to that lecture because it would be then convenient for you to understand here. Right. In the previous class, I had introduced you to the various dimensions of women's labor, and the class had discussed the nature and the extent of women's involvement in key sectors of the economy. And here I told you that these key sectors of the economy are not limited to the paid employment, but they are also involved with the other sectors of the economy. For example, that is the unpaid employment. Apart from that, your voluntary work and the informal economy. And if we understand, women's participation is mostly concentrated in the marginal sectors of the economy. That is, they are involved in part-time workers. They are involved in activities which are not counted as proper working hours. So there, women's concentration, why is it so? In today's class, we will be discussing the reasons, the determinants for that, why there has been an increase in female labor force participation and why there has been a decrease in female labor force participation. Why we say so? Increase because since the 1990s, the gender gap has reduced. Here you need to understand that the labor force participation, for example, if it was 79% for men before. One second. Oh. So it was 79% before. I don't know why this. Well, I'll just discuss it normally. It was 79% before. Now it has decreased to 76%. Overall, the female or male labor force participation has decreased. But the gap which was earlier widened, that is, if it was 79% of the males who were participating in the 1990s and it was 52% of the females, now it has reduced to 76% of the males and 49% of the females. So the gap, if you see, earlier if it was 4 to 5%, has now reduced. So this is important, and therefore we need to study that women economic participation in the perspective of how it has increased, the reasons for its increase, and the reasons for its decrease. Now, in the context of ILO report, which I had referred to in the previous class, women's economic participation has reduced, female labor force participation has reduced in the economy since 2005. We need to figure out, or we need to understand what are the reasons for the same. And most importantly, why this lecture is important is because we are expecting a question on COVID-19. Has COVID-19 impact been gender neutral or it has been gender discriminatory? So that we will discuss in today's class, right? So let us first understand what are the determinants of women economic participation, right? What factors play a role in women's economic participation, or what are the reasons or the determinants that impact women's economic participation? The first one is the structural factors. Structural factors in the context, if you have read your NCERT book, you would understand that there are certain social structures, certain social processes, certain social groups. When we read sociology, these are the things we understand in the broader context. Similarly, there are structural factors which impact women's economic participation, and there are social cultural factors which impact women's work in the economy or in the household or other sectors of the economy, right? Other sectors, again, you need to go back and listen to the previous lecture, which talks about the 4 sectors that we have highlighted. That is the paid employment, unpaid sector, voluntary employment, and the informal economy, that is the black economy or the parallel economy. So the structural factors, what are the structural factors that impact women's work? Here, the 4 major social structures. Here you can add and delete other structures, but the 4 major structures are family, caste, class, community. How do these impact women's participation. Now, within family, if you remember that I have discussed with you previously, that there is a sexual division of labor. Sexual division of labor gets its understanding from the biological division of labor, where men are supposed to perform instrumental roles, go out and work, and women are supposed to perform expressive functions. That is, because of their biological function of reproduction, they are the ones who have to perform the expressive role, take care of the children at the house, and take care of the household activities. Because of this sexual division of labor, there is an ideology which has been built around it, the social ideology which has been built around it, and this role ideology shapes women's participation or women's work in the family, in the school, in the media, in the workplace, and other sectors. Now, school, for example, let me bring to you a very important point here. In school textbooks, we usually see that it is men who are showed with occupational activities such as they act as pilots or they are in army. And women are showed in a sari or in a suit where they're taking care of the household or cooking or doing other things. It was first time that the Maharashtra government made a difference and they started incorporating women in the role of pilot and men in the role of household activities or taking care of the household activities. Right. So in the family itself, your socialization, if you remember in the previous to previous class where I had told you how to secure your 300 plus in sociology option, I had told you that the moment you're born, the moment you take birth, sociology takes you under its fold. Similarly, if you're born in a particular gender, your role would be predetermined by that gender. Whether you are a male or a female, that would determine your role and your status in the family. So this continues to perpetuate in your school through your textbooks and other means. Similarly, toilet problems, the girls in the school, they don't have access to toilet facilities, and that is the reason that they are not able to enter schools or go to the schools from faraway places. So all these things continue to perpetuate our attitudes, our beliefs. Media, again, how women are projected in a certain way. They are projected as an objectified human being in terms of how they dress up, what role they perform in the TV serials, in the web series. Now you have started seeing a slight difference in how women are portrayed. They are being shown as IPS officers, or they are being shown in a predominant role as a political person. So all these factors determine how women role are portrayed and how they continue to perpetuate. Then again, workplace. Workplace is a very important factor which determines how women are, how the structural factor of the workplace, how it impacts women's participation. I will come back to this point when we will do what are the reasons for decrease in women's participation, and we will see that workplace in general, the workplace has certain problems in terms of their occupation segregation, problems in terms of women being overrepresented in the part-time jobs, problem with respect to gender wage gap, problem with respect to women being overrepresented in the informal economy or being overrepresented in the self-employment. And this self-employment involves both the family workers and own account workers, right? Apart from that, when we talk about caste, the second factor, caste, the upper caste women in the rural areas, they do not engage in outer work home. Now, if you remember, if you have read before about Uma Chakravarti's article on Brahmanical Patriarchy, you would notice that these upper caste women and how the ideology of upper caste women started spreading to the lower caste women. Where did this ideology come from? Earlier societies, if you see the Rig Vedic times or the early Rig Vedic times, the Indus Valley civilization, women had equal participation with respect to men. They even participated in the political communities, But after that, what happened? It was with the invasion, and then the upper caste women in the rural areas, the caste came into being, the class came into being, the division between Aryan versus non-Aryan, and the upper caste women started carrying the ideology that the non-work, if they don't perform any work, they would associate it with your higher status and prestige. They were supposed to do parda to continue maintaining their sexual purity and caste purity. And all these factors, all these ideologies started to play a very important role in terms of what economic position a woman would hold in the economy, right, in the society. However, these upper caste women in the rural areas, though they could practice the philosophy of non work and associate it with the notion of higher caste and prestige, the lower caste women, on the other hand, because of the economic problems at their front, the, the income in terms of equal income in terms of the poor household, and therefore the terminology of caste comes into being, that class comes into being, that a woman of higher economic class. Now, most of the times you would see that women where they belong to a higher economic class, they do not actually get into the practice of employment or they work, right? Because that is associated with the higher class status that they do not need to work. The husband's higher income can support them, or the family's higher income can support them eventually. So they don't need to work. But the women with lower economics class and lower caste, they have to work. They have to continue performing their tasks to sustain the family, right? Apart from that, there are certain notions which are attached to women's work. The appropriateness and the suitability of certain types of work for women. That is, teaching and nursing are considered as suitable occupations for women. Why are they considered suitable occupations? Because those are associated with the expressive role of the woman, where the sexual division of labor. Now you can, start connecting the dots that the sexual division of labor talks about their expressive role, and therefore women, when entered in the economic sphere, this expressive role continues to dominate their economic profile, and that is why we say that women are concentrated in certain sectors of the economy, or there is a sectoral segregation in terms of employment of men versus women. Apart from that, there is also reasons of with terms of access of education to women, training, resources, and skills. All these factors play a very predominant role in terms of what type of work a woman would perform. Later on, when I'll discuss with you with terms of sectors of economy, and when there is technological advancement, women are not able to actively take part in the economy because there is a technological advancement, and they are not equipped with the training and the skills for technologically adopting the economic change. And that is the reason they are not able to take part in the economic sphere. Last, scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Now, these, if you understand, these two sectors or sections of the society are already deprived. And within these sections, women are doubly oppressed. They are socially and economically deprived, and women within these groups are more deprived. They have a double burden, triple burden. You must have heard about this terminology of double burden and triple burden. If not, I would request you to please go back and read on it. That, for example, you belong to a lower caste, you also belong to a lower class, and then you are a woman. You're a female. So this is being triply oppressed, being triply burdened with a particular identity, and that impacts your position, your economic and social position in this society. Right? Regional differences. How there are regional differences in terms of, and how regional differences impact women's work. This is very important if you understand that in South India, Northeast India, and Central Tribal people, women's economic participation is higher vis-a-vis women in the North India. Can you think of a reason for this? For example, let's take the tribal groups. We say that women are more oppressed within a particular section of scheduled tribes, but in tribal society, there is one important factor which ensures that women are equally participating. What is that factor? That they have not been economically advanced to the level of the other sections of the population. And therefore, the participation of women, the economic participation of women is equal in terms of, for example, in hunting-gathering societies, there women continue to take part in the activities actively, whereas in societies where there is agriculture is a predominant one, I'm saying agriculture, a predominant one. Be careful. There, women would have more participation. They would be involved in certain activities, but those activities again would be determined by their sexuality. Sexuality, in terms of they would not be involved in the activities of plowing, but they would be involved in activities of sowing, threshing, and others. So, therefore, in terms of the regional differences, for example, women in the Northeast, they are more educated vis-a-vis women in the other sectors of the other regions of the country. They are more educated, they are more literate, and therefore they are able to participate economically vis-a-vis others. Right? Similarly, there is an argument that in the rice growing areas, women are more economically active vis-a-vis in the wheat growing areas. And for this, the reasons are both cultural and economic. Right? In terms of labor market, how do women participate in the labor market? The family ideology determines again the suitability and the unsuitability of certain jobs. That is reflected in the job stereotyping in the labor market. For example, I just told you that in agriculture, women do not plow. They are involved in sowing or weeding activities. Similarly, in the industrial or the manufacturing sector, you will not see women involved in minerals and mining. They would not be involved in electronics. They would be involved in garment sector or handicraft sector. In services, women would be involved in teaching, nursing, office-related secretarial jobs vis-a-vis others. This is known as occupational segregation. And occupational segregation, since I'm not able to use my pen tab today, I don't know what is the issue. I'm trying to use it, but there is some problem today. Let me see just one last time. 1 second, just can you please hold on? Usually it works, but today there seems to be some problem. And I'll try again. I think it is because I opened it through a different version. 1 second. Right, so it was the wrong application. Thank God, because I wanted to write certain things and I was not able to do so. Right, so in the labor market, I was talking about two types of segregation. One is your vertical segregation. One is your vertical segregation, and the other is your horizontal. What I just told you now, that women are concentrated in certain sectors of the economy. I'm really sorry for today's little bit of problem here in connecting the correct application. So coming back to the point that women are dominant in certain sectors of the economy. In terms of horizontal segregation, we talk about women being concentrated in certain services sector, women being occupied in certain sectors which are predominantly defining women's expressive functions, and therefore it is also sometimes called as pink collarization. You must have heard of this term, and when in terms of entrepreneurship, we say that women are predominantly involved in 3 Ps: pickle, papad, and others. So what we need to understand here is that there is horizontal segregation. Horizontal segregation means sectoral composition, sectoral segregation, and vertical segregation. Vertical segregation here means that women are not given the post of decision making positions or to the leadership positions. That is clearly visible that the number of CEOs we have in India, if you just go back and see the data on that, women are least represented. Out of the billionaires that we have in India, total billionaires that we have in India, only 4 are women. That is according to the latest data that I had seen in 2019. You can go back and recheck and redo it. But you need to understand that there is a vertical segregation and there is a horizontal segregation. Vertical segregation, the hierarchy, where women are not given positions of decision making or a leadership one, and horizontal segregation, where women are not involved in all the sectors of the economy, rather being concentrated in certain sectors of the economy given their sexual division of labor, given their understanding of socio-cultural reasons. The last factor in the structural reason is the environmental changes and the women's work, especially with regard to climate change and with regard to areas which are hit by land degradation, water scarcity, deforestation. The burden to take care of the household needs with terms of water, with terms of food, all this falls on women. For example, a region hit by water scarcity, it would be a woman's responsibility to go outside and fetch water thousands of kilometers away, or thousands not, but maybe tens or hundreds of kilometers away to go and fetch water for the whole family. So whose responsibility it is on the woman because of, again, sexual division of labor, which is actually continuing to play a very important role in our society. And this sexual division of labor, I have told you earlier also, that the functionalist school thought it is because of the biological division of labor, because of marriage, the social organization, that we have divided the works between males and females. And this continues to exist till date. However, feminist scholars argue that this is not because of the biological division of labor, but because of the socio-cultural reasons. And it is here that brings us to the next settings or next heading, that is socio-cultural factors which act as determinants of women's work. What are these social cultural factors? Values, norms, attitudes, customs. Now, if you remember, I have just told you that, for example, in caste, there was a certain practice which were adopted. For example, higher caste women were not allowed to work. Non-work was given a higher status in the economy, right? Higher status in the society. This value, this norm, this attitude, this custom started carrying forward. Let me introduce you to a very important concept here, that is Brahmanical Patriarchy. What is Brahmanical Patriarchy? Brahmanical Patriarchy is the term which was used by Uma Chakravarti to define how there were certain set of customs, values, which introduced in the early Indian society, ancient society, and continues till date as because of the process of Sanskritization. Because here I wanted to introduce you to the concept of Sanskritization. It is important for you to first understand what is Brahmanical Patriarchy. Since I cannot go deep into the subject, let me just tell you one thing briefly, a small story briefly, that in the early societies, in the religious texts, women were considered as subjects who cannot make rational decisions. And this is with both Western societies and the Indian societies, the Eastern societies. Women were considered that they were, they would indulge in sexual activities, they would not maintain caste purity. So Brahmins of that time, or the religious texts of that time, started developing certain norms, certain values, which would control women's sexuality and maintain caste purity. So this was the two aims of Brahmanical Patriarchy, that is to maintain caste purity and to maintain sexual purity. Right. In this context, they introduce certain norms. And what are these norms? For example, Parda system. They introduced Parda system so that women's sexual purity could be maintained. A no to intercaste marriages. Women were allowed to marry within their own caste. And here, if a woman wants to marry a higher caste man, it was allowed. But if a woman wants to marry a lower caste man, this was considered a sin because they were changing the caste of the child. So this pattern, to maintain this pattern, they introduced certain norms and values. Similarly, when they introduced that women would not be working and they would restrict themselves to the household activities, with the process of Sanskritization, what is it? The Sanskritization is a process where the lower caste people try to adopt values, norms, attitudes of the upper caste or the twice born caste. This process of Sanskritization has been very much visible in the Indian society, and the withdrawal of women from the other activities, the manual activities or the economic sphere, was associated with the higher caste people. And that subsequently started spreading to the lower caste people also. And therefore, women were restricted in terms of their economic participation. Now, I told you about the Padda system and how women's mobility and work pattern was restricted. So, values, norms, attitudes, customs. If you recollect, this is also part of your paper 4, which talks about your attitudes, values, and norms and how they continue to play a very important role in the society in terms of our behavior. All these things reflect on our behavior, and that therefore they act as socio-cultural factors, a very important factor determining the women's work. Next is family ideology and socialization of girls. Again, in terms of family, I have already explained it to you. That's a sexual division of labor, defines the sex roles. These sex roles being instrumental roles and expressive roles, the instrumental roles being played by males and the expressive roles being played by females. They attach or devalue women's work or girls' entitlement to the family. Now, this is very important. What entitlement a woman or a girl holds in the society, in the family. Now, so all these concepts are so closely intertwined to each other that when you try to open one, the whole Pandora box is open that you have to tell the entire story. So, women access to health, nutrition, education. If you have seen in the Indian family, you all are part of that family structure, and you have seen that how education or health or nutrition of a son is given more preference vis-a-vis a girl, right, a daughter. We all, in general, have faced problems of this preference being given to the sons vis-a-vis daughters. This preference continues to play a very important role when it comes to property holding or when it comes to access to resources, economic resources. Because of the notion of patriarchy, women give away their rights of property to their brothers. And this is the concept which is closely associated to patriarchal bargain. And this has been asked in your examination earlier, right? Women give up their rights to don't offend, so that they don't offend their brothers. They don't offend their brothers because at the time of crisis, it is only their brothers on whom they can fall back upon. So, to continue the rights of the male, the son, women themselves give up their own rights, their own property rights. And this is a concept of Brahmanical patriarchal bargain, where women continue to practice patriarchy in everyday life. Though it may be an individual gain, but it is a collective loss. Why a collective loss? Because now, if you see, you go back and compare the facts about access to property with regard to women vis-a-vis men. How much of land of a family woman has, daughter has, vis-a-vis how much of the land a son has. Access to resources plays a very important, significant role in terms of women's participation or women's work in the family, in the society, sorry. Then gender-based division of labor, again, women are concentrated in low-paid jobs. I have just introduced you to one concept, that is, there is occupational segregation, and this occupational segregation is in terms of vertical and horizontal segregation. Gender-based division of labor talks about how women are concentrated in low-paid jobs. Let me tell you that the gender gap, the gender wage gap, overall across the world is 23%. That means 77% of what men earn. Women earn only 77% of what men earn in the economy. And this is very closely associated to woman being a mother. There is a concept, a terminology that is known as mother gap. I will come back to this point later, where uh, this mother gap refers to the earnings that a woman would have vis-a-vis the earnings a woman would have with children. So there is a gap between women not having children and what a woman has her earnings with the children. So this gap is known as mother gap. How much she is actually losing out with children vis-a-vis not with children. I'm not saying that women should not reproduce. I mean, then the biological circle would be hampered. But we need regulatory policies, we need such policies on board where this mother gap is not harming women's earning. That is important, and therefore one of the ways that you can rectify the problems of gender-based division of labor, the gender wage gap, is that you get a policy where you are ensuring that this gap, this motherhood of a woman is not impacting her earnings, right? Then self-perception of need to work which is out of choice or compulsion. I just told you about patriarchal bargaining where women themselves practice patriarchy. Women practice patriarchy because they have internalized the role ideology of being of a particular gender. This ideology is shaped since the time we take our birth in the family, in the school, by media, by other work sectors of the society. So this ideology is being reinforced by women, and women now choose their occupation in such a way that they have to take care of the larger family, right? They have to maintain the work-family balance, right? And since they have to maintain the work-family balance, they also ensure that their income acts as supplementary income, which contributes to the family as a supplementary income, and therefore they work sometimes out of compulsion just to sustain. If they had worked, for example, today if I tell you that you have to go and start earning out of compulsion, would you be motivated or would you be trying to engage more in the job, or you would just be just pushed to the extent that you're working bare minimum? But something you do out of your choice, for example, you start your own venture, you would make sure that the venture increases in its terms of quality, quantity, and has more profit. So, what is the self perception of a woman with terms of choice or in terms of doing work out of compulsion? So, these were the two sets of reasons which determine a woman's participation, a woman's work in the economy. One, the structural factors, the other being the social cultural factors. So when you write an answer in sociology, or for that matter in GS paper 1, you must know that in the beginning, because it was not working, I completely slipped out of my mind. It is important to ensure that GS paper 1, when you have any such question with regard to women's participation or with regard to any of the society questions, you have to actually add a sociological perspective to it. Right, and therefore this topic is very important vis-a-vis questions with regard to women. And if you are aware, if you go back and see last year papers, every year you get at least one question with respect to gender, right? May it be problems of middle class women, may it be problems of gender discrimination, or may it be problem of sex ratio. So every year in GS paper 1 you get one question. Similarly, in essay, you get one essay topic with regard to women. In the current times, I can expect, and we all are expecting, a question on how COVID-19 would impact women. And therefore, I wanted to take up this topic with regard to the economic sphere. How COVID-19 has not been gender neutral, but has been gender discriminatory. So we'll come back to that point in some time. But let us discuss the reasons for the decline in women economic participation, which has decreased to 21% in 2018 from 32% in 2005, and this is the data given by ILO. Again, if you remember, I told you that according to the ILO report, if women start participating equally as men, India's GDP would go up by 27%, right? But this has been declining since 2005. Let us find the reasons for why this decline. The first one is the absence of a comprehensive and a rational policy when it comes to economic development, of women employability. We don't have a comprehensive and a rational policy. We talk about equal representation of women, 33% representation of women in parliament. That has not been passed yet. We talk about providing women with maternity benefit, but this again has problem with maternity benefit because women are given, and that is the reason that the employers start employing male instead of females, because then it is a burden on the company to provide maternity benefit to the woman. So the younger women do not get employment at an equal status vis-a-vis a young man, because they are often being thought as that now as a burden to the company, that they would have to be paid maternity benefit, they would have to be paid other social security benefits. So it is very important that we have a one rational policy which can take care of all these needs. The perception of male as a breadwinner. I just told you some time back when we talked about the socio-cultural factors, that what is the self-perception of women in terms of their employment, whether it is because of choice or it is because of compulsion. When it becomes out of compulsion, women income is termed as supplementary income. They are actually just acting, they're not as the main breadwinner. If a woman has to go out and work and a man has to go out and work, it would be the responsibility of the woman to take care of the family, to take care of the other chores of the household vis-a-vis man. And therefore, women work is always considered as temporary. The income is considered as supplementary. Please bear in mind these words are very important. Temporary employment, in terms of crisis, the first jobs that are, thrown out of the jobs are the temporary employees. And therefore, in the times of crisis, when there is an economic change, it is women who lose their jobs first. So it is very important to understand what kind or nature of work a woman has in the economy. And in terms of economic participation, their work is temporary, their work is supplementary. Right? And again, I told you this point, higher income of the households leads to decline in women participation. The high class women, we would mostly see getting involved in charity, or they are getting involved in kitty parties and all. They don't have the need to earn more. Now, please don't generalize it. These are all studies which are done over the period of time. I am not criticizing any section of the population here, but generally it is understood in the terms of economic theories that the higher income of the household leads to a decline in women's economic participation. Right? Structural changes in the economy. That's what I was just telling you, that if women economy work is considered as temporary, and if there is any change in the structure of the economy, their employment is harmed. For example, there was a decline in the traditional rural industries in the times of Britishers. That led to decline in women economic participation. After the Britishers left, there was industrial development and the competition increased, and therefore women were pushed to the agricultural sector, and that adversely affected women's status in the workforce. Lack of assets in their own name, very important. Women, I just told you that women themselves give up their right of property to their brothers, because they don't want to harm the brothers' access or brothers' rights to property, and therefore they lack assets in terms of land, house. They don't have their own savings. They are considered basically, they don't have these economic resources. Now, this has a wider implication in terms of their economic participation. Then there are cultural restrictions. Cultural restrictions, again, I would ask you to please refer to the previous class where we have discussed about the household work and the allocation of time. Various studies have highlighted that it is a woman's responsibility to give her time and energy for the subsistence task of the household and the burdens of child caring and rearing because of their expressive role. Again, sexual division of labor. You must understand that sexual division of labor and patriarchy, these are the two sole themes that run across all the issues that a woman face in social sector, in economic sector, in political sector. These two are the only reasons. All the reasons which are stated, the underlying factors in them is sexual division of labor and patriarchy. And therefore, I had introduced that to you before we started understanding the factors for the decline or determinants of the woman economic participation, right? So time use survey, if you can recollect, I had told you that 299 minutes a woman contributes to the household activities, whereas it is only 97 minutes per day. Now this is per day that a man contributes to the household activities. So all the works, all these restrictions, cultural restrictions, restricts a woman's ability to equally take part in the economic sphere. Then division of labor, I just told you in terms of technological changes. Since women do not have equal access to in terms of education, in terms of training, in terms of skills, women are not able to keep themselves at par with terms of technological changes, and that leads to a decline in women economic participation, right? Increased attendance in education. Now this is one of the positive factors. Why positive factors? Earlier women were not encouraged, the girls were not encouraged to pursue higher studies. But with time we have seen that they have started gaining education, and the latest survey says that women graduates have increased vis-a-vis men graduates. Again, there is a scissors effect. I cannot introduce much things over here because we lack time, but women participation in terms of education sectors have increased. Now more and more women are pursuing higher education, and therefore when you're pursuing higher education, you are lacking, or your participation in the economic sector is declining, right? So these were few of the few of the factors which suggest that women's participation is declining. Now you would say that, okay, if that is declining, why is the gap being reduced? In South Asia, the gap has not been reduced. The gap has further widened. Let me just briefly cover this part because I really want to cover the COVID-19 and how it has impacted women economic participation. That women economic participation, the global gender gap in terms of participation, female and male labor force participation, that has reduced. But in South Asia, that has increased, and therefore it is important, or it was important for me to cover the factors which has led to decline in women economic participation. Now I will just briefly tell you that how or what are the reasons, factors for increase in women economic participation. This we cover in detail when we do work and economic life in our normal syllabus, the course structure. But I would like to introduce or tell you some of the factors here, right? So that you can write it in your essay or GS paper 1, because these are general sociological factors that has led to increase in women economic participation. Now, once we say that the increased attendance in education has led to a decline in economic participation, there is one factor which has led to increase in economic participation. That is, women age of marriage. Now we are further having a bill in the parliament that should further increase the age of marriage. But age of marriage, since it has increased, women burden with respect to child care has decreased. Now you don't reproduce 4 or 5 children, right? The fertility rate has reduced. So this has pushed more women in the economic activities. In the times of crisis, or last 1 decade, you have seen that women have started increasing their participation in self-employment, in entrepreneurship, how they are setting up their own enterprises and getting themselves involved in employment, right? So the age of marriage, the pushing up of age of marriage and the burden of childcare has reduced. Age of marriage has increased and the fertility rate has decreased. Another factor is that since the 1960s and 70s, the women's movement gave a major push to increasing the participation of women in the economic sphere, because there they talked about the equal rights. There was a desire for personal fulfillment, a desire where, if you remember, I've told you that in the second wave of feminism, the personal became political, and therefore women started entering the economic sphere. This was because of the 1960s and 70s women's movement, and later on, the subsequent decade, 1975 to 85, was declared as a UN decade for women. Right. Other factor is with the changing structure of families. Now, you have seen a shift in terms of structure of the family, where we have nuclear families. Now, nuclear families have two benefits. One, less time is spent on taking care of the children and the family. And second, in the urban sphere, there is a higher burden of cost of living. And to supplement their cost of living, women starts getting themselves employed, and they start taking part in the employment activity so that they can add to the income and bear the burden of higher cost of living in the urban areas. Right. Other factor, when we say the structure of economy, a change in structure of economy has led to decrease in terms of women's participation. This can also act positively. The structure of economy, a change in structure of economy can also act positively. For example, since the 1990s, there has been a push towards services sector, and this services sector has employed higher percentage of women vis-a-vis men. Right. Similarly, export-oriented units. See, here I'm just telling you in brief. If you have seen or if you join the full course, you will get more details on it. But since I wanted to introduce this topic here, that why there is an increase or what are the factors for increase in women's participation, I am telling you in brief. Right. So, export-oriented units. Since the 1990s, globalization has got a hype. Liberalization, privatization, globalization, LPG era. Export-oriented units, especially if you see in garment industry, in handicraft industry, women participation has increased. See countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, women participation in the economy has increased. Right. So change in the structure of economy sometimes has a positive influence towards women's economic participation. Right. Again, apart from that, there is mechanization of domestic tasks. We have domestic services, we have provision for domestic services, we have dishwasher, vacuum cleaners, which has reduced the burden of work, household work in the family. And then there are other factors like economic poverty. If there is higher poverty, if there is economic pressure, women would participate. If there is less pressure or there is less poverty, women would not participate. Also, in terms of state policies and legislations, that has also given a certain push towards women's economic participation. For example, we have maternity benefit. See, whatever factor we talk about can have a positive consequence as well as a negative consequence. You need to know how you have to write the answer. For example, because there is creche facilities, because there is state policy for maternity benefit, in the government sector, women participation has increased. Because there was a change in the legislation and policy where women were earlier not inducted in the army, women were started getting themselves enrolled in army, navy and air force. Earlier it was restricted. So state policies can have both positive and negative consequence. All these factors you have to understand properly, that which factor would have a positive consequence and how that factor could simultaneously have a negative consequence, right? Coming to the most important part of the lecture, COVID-19 and women economic participation. Why we say that women are at a higher risk because of COVID-19 vis-a-vis men. The first reason to this is that I told you that women are involved in temporary employment. Globally, across the world, 57% of the women are involved in part-time activities, and this is according to International Labour Organization. And since women are involved in part-time activities, in terms of crisis, they are the first one who are thrown out. You have seen because of COVID-19, there have been a lot of layoffs, temporary workers have been thrown out, migrant workers have been pushed back. All these factors have led to a higher burden or implication on women, because they are the ones who are more employed in the uh, temporary employment, right? Next, safety nets are not wide enough. Safety nets, your pensions, your maternity benefits, they are not wide enough to take care of the woman in the time of crisis. There is no health insurance, there is no paid leave, paid sick leave, maternity benefit, pensions, unemployment benefits. Again, why are they not there? This is associated to the first point, that women are employed in temporary sectors. They are employed in temporary zones, and therefore they don't get health insurance, they don't get sick leave, they don't get maternity benefit, they don't get pensions. All these factors affect women economic participation. In the times of crisis, if someone got sick, or by bad God's luck that they died, their family would not get any health insurance, because they were temporary employees, they were contractual employees, they were not full-time employees. Women are concentrated in part-time workers. We just discussed that women are concentrated in part-time workers. They are concentrated in temporary employment, marginal employment, and therefore they do not get benefits of safety nets, right? Again, they are involved in self-employment activities or contributing as family workers. Again, in these family workers, their work is unpaid and invisible. If they are even self-employed, they do not have the capacities to keep running their business. And this is very closely associated to the next point here. Women entrepreneurs who are self-employed or the own account workers. First, when we talked about the point that they do not have access to resources, economic resources in terms of land, so that restricts their ability to access credit from the banking officials. That there is a whole lot of literature which talks about how banking officials are discriminatory towards women entrepreneurs, because they cannot provide collateral for their, if they want loans, they cannot provide collaterals, and therefore their access to credit is reduced. In the times of crisis, this access is further reduced, and therefore women entrepreneurs face a further challenge and a problem, and the self-employed workers also face a challenge. Service sector reeling under restrictions. Now 55% of the women are employed in service sector vis-a-vis 44%. And this is overall across the world. So 55% of the women are employed in service sector, and you know that female dominated service sectors are, for example, food, hospitality, tourism, your beauty parlors, and the other things which have been widely affected by COVID-19. They are the harshest or the badly hit one. The tourism sector has gone to trash. Your hospitality sector has gone down. And this, since women dominated these sectors of the economy, these service sectors of the economy, they are facing more problem. And therefore, the impact of COVID-19 has not been gender neutral. More work and no pay. What is the work they're not paid for? It is the unpaid work at the household level. Because of quarantine, schools are shut, all the activities, creche facilities are shut, the playgrounds where earlier children could go and play, those are shut. All these factors have imposed an additional burden of household towards women, and they have to now perform more work within house as well as their employment, but they don't get paid for it. They're not being paid for this work, right? So these were the factors of COVID-19 and how it has not been gender neutral but has been gender discriminatory. We have, in this lecture, we have focused on the determinants of women's work, that is socio-cultural and structural factors. Then we discussed factors for the decline in women's participation. Then we discussed what are the factors for increase in women's participation, and then we discussed COVID-19 and women economic participation. Now, when you get an essay or a question or a short note, it is very important that you conclude, and therefore I have specifically given this section over here that you must conclude your answer or your essay. The year 2001 was declared by Government of India as a Women's Year of Economic Empowerment. Already 1975 to 85 was a UN decade for women. And year 2001 was declared by Government of India as a Women's Year of Empowerment. They promised in that year to ensure that women have the rightful place in, in, in the country's social, political, and economic sphere. But that has not really been taken care of. We have still not achieved the targets. Then we had MDG's target, you know that they have expired in 2015. And now we have Sustainable Development Goals target, which the agenda to achieve these targets is 2030. Now, how women's economic participation implicate the Sustainable Development Goals? There are 4 goals which directly implicate or which are directly affected by women's economic participation if they have equal participation or something. Goal 5. What is Goal 5? Goal 5 talks about reducing gender inequalities at work. This can be achieved if we address the above points. Goal 1, reducing poverty. If we increase women economic participation in the economy, according to ILO, that would push the economic GDP to by 27%, and that would help reducing the poverty. Goal 10, again that talks about reducing inequalities, and Goal 8, which again talks about employment and economic growth. If women are given equal economic participation vis-a-vis men, then there would be economic growth and there would be more employment opportunities. So work participation, to conclude, work participation, now go back to the previous lecture, the first thing that I had started, a relationship between economics and sociology. An individual's economic status determines their social position. The Committee on the Status of Women also talked about this point, that their economic position determines their social position. So work participation is an important indicator for an individual's social status or any group in the society. It is important to understand, therefore, the nature, range, and patterns of women's work, and that we have discussed in today's lecture. In what ways a woman's unpaid work is attributed, that is also very important in the economy. And though we cannot pay women, this is something I discussed with you in the previous lecture, women cannot be paid, their work must be recognized, their work must be reduced and redistributed. So the key word here is redistributed. We talk about increased adaptation of man in the household activities, but we also need to understand that there is a concept of lagged adaptation. What is lagged adaptation? Lagged adaptation means that men, though, have increasingly started taking part in the domestic activities, but this increase has been a lagged one vis-a-vis women contribution. So there should be an equal redistribution of work and harmonization in the work and family life. What are the other 2 factors which are important, or the ways in which you can reduce gender discrimination and increase women participation is that you must tackle sectoral and occupational segregation. Sectoral, that is horizontal segregation, and occupational segregation, which also talks about vertical segregation. Women should be given more positions in the leadership roles and decision-making powers. If that increases, women's economic participation would increase in the economy. The gender wage gap must be reduced. How can you reduce a gender wage gap? You must have in place a policy which takes care of not discriminating wages in the economy, and there should be strict rules and regulations in terms of enforcement of these laws, that they reduce the gender wage gap, and not just reduce, but that must be closed. If you are doing equal work vis-a-vis men, then you must be equally paid for that work, right? Apart from that, you must reduce gender stereotypes. How can you reduce gender stereotypes? You ensure that in the society, the ideology which is being run in terms of patriarchy must be checked, must be rectified. The ideology which women themselves reinforce in everyday life, that needs to be checked. Men are reinforcing, but you can challenge it. Women themselves must not reinforce patriarchy in their everyday life. It can be a 1-day challenge, it can be a 2-day challenge, but the decades or the ages of subjugation of women in the society needs to be challenged, needs to be recognized on the first place, and then it can be challenged and rectified. So, in terms of that, it is the government's responsibility, it is the people's responsibility to work in harmony and recognize women's role in the economy as well as in the household sectors. And for this, one thing that the governments can immediately do is that invest more money, invest more or create more policies which address women's needs. How? Creating the basic infrastructure in terms of health and education, ensuring that there is a balance between family and work life, and ensure that the work which is being evaluated, it is being done in a gender responsive way. There is a promotion to equal payment of work, and there is promotion to equal participation at work. Right. So this was the whole lecture that I had planned in terms of part 1 and part 2. So we conclude with part 2, and I hope you have understood the meaning of women economic participation, the determinants of women's economic participation, and the reasons and the factors for its decrease as well as increase, and how COVID-19 has not been gender neutral. Thank you so much for being part of this lecture. Till then, study well. Thank you so much.